So, what you really need to know about maintaining a good sex life and connection in a long-term relationship. I am Erin, and if you are just joining me, if you're new to my world, I am a sex therapist and intimacy expert, and I specialize in working with women with low desire, right? And I help them stop feeling like sex is a chore and start looking forward to it again. Because I want to have sex is like the main thing that I hear when women reach out to me. And that is exactly why I'm excited to be here today and talk about this because there is a much simpler way to go about this where you're not forcing yourself because you're working with yourself. And I am so excited. I am so excited today about our guest because she is an expert in the field of sex and relationships and also a dear friend of mine. And I am so thankful that she is here to share her insight, her expertise with us. So, Erica, welcome.
Hi.
So glad you're
Thanks,
here. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Erin, for such a kind, warm welcome. Okay, I'm Erica Thomke. I am also a licensed social worker and have a degree in human sexuality. I work as a psychotherapist and occasionally as a speaker. And my kind of like area of expertise is in connection and vulnerability. Um, so that I also work with folks with desire issues. Sometimes that falls under that umbrella, or other forms of trauma that have created barriers in connection. Porn dependency, also a barrier in connection. Um, so that's sort of the type of stuff that I work with. Um, yeah, and I'm happy to be here and chat today about how to connect more, how to have better sex here.
Yes. And I am so excited that we get to take advantage of that. And I love that you're talking about this idea of vulnerability, connection in relationships, because one of the questions that was submitted for today was a woman who was wondering about why her libido is gone. And she said, is my libido gone because I don't love my husband anymore? Or is it gone because of my personal health? And I think a really important part of this is that she shared some context about how her husband's been kind of a jerk in this and how she was like feeling this expectation. It was feeling like a chore. It was feeling
Mhm.
like this obligation. And that was leading to a ton of stress. Like she talked about emotional eating and body image issues that come along with that, which how many of us women deal with that kind of stuff in general, let alone when we kind of pile this stuff on. And she was like, is it possible for my libido to come back after all this? And so to start this off, I think a really important part of this conversation is how this system works. We talk about sex
Mhm,
like
mhm,
in the
mhm.
movies, like it's easy breezy and it's just the throes of passion and they overcome me,
It's a
right?
vibe.
It's right, exactly. And we miss that this is a physical system, right? Your sexual
Mhm.
response is a physical system, just like your stress response, just like your appetite, right? Like this is a physical system in your body. And what this question made me think of, and I want to hear your thoughts on it, Erica, is how when sex starts to become something that is stressful, our brain, which is our largest sex organ, starts to associate it with something that is threatening, right? Like,
Yes.
so what happens and why sex sometimes feels like a chore and an obligation is because when this happens, your brain kicks on your fight or flight response. That's your threat response because that's your stress response
Mhm.
instead of your sex drive. So what happens is people think, is there something wrong with me? Am I broken? Why is this not showing up? Your libido is there. It's there. It's working just as it should, but your brain is just kicking on the wrong system. So with that context, I'd love to hear, Erica, your thoughts about this relationship piece and how it impacts this.
Oh, that's such a good point. So, yeah. Oh man, I'm having so many thoughts. So, with okay, I think that you're going to go into like the individual, like your individual relationship with that part of yourself and how that is going to shift in your brain, right? But if we're looking at the outer system of threat response and stress, right? Like we want to think about cues, right? And think about like what are the things that are moving us towards something or away from something. And same thing happens in our relationship towards like connection, right? And for some people, we need to have connection in other ways to establish like emotional safety or like even a sense of physical safety. So we need to have quality time or we need to have like a deep emotional conversation or something like that that is soothing our nervous system and helping us feel connected to the other person. And I think what you're saying will help override that, that mental switch of like, oh, this being vulnerable right now is a threat and not, oh, being vulnerable right now is something that will make me feel, warm and connected and, held by my partner.
Yes. And I love this idea of the cues, right? Because again, I think that how the conversation goes about sex is that it like quote unquote just happens, right?
Mhm.
And if the cues are moving you away from your partner and it's been really stressful and the conversations have been really tough to have, it makes so much sense to me that you wouldn't be super interested in having sex, right? Like I almost think about like literal math. Like if we tally and you have 5 connection points, but 35 disconnection points during the day, like the math just to steal from the kids, the math ain't mathin', right? Like
Yeah,
it just doesn't add up. Like those
it
cues
doesn't.
toward versus away, I think is so important in this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and I think that's something that I often come back to in my framework for any sort of relationship challenge is like or well, I mean, any challenge really is like what's moving you toward your goal and like what's moving you away from it. And sometimes it's barriers, like things outside of your control. Like I'm really stressed out at work, or, like my kids are like right in the other room, or like whatever it is. And sometimes it's like deep trauma stuff that we have to work through, but regardless, there's always going to be things that are, the tallies that are moving us away, and then the things that are moving us towards. And it can be simple things like, oh, just the smell of my partner. And when you're a teenager, just the smell of somebody can like get you going in a second, but you also have far fewer things moving you away as a teenager. Your brain is like totally different, right? At that point. But that's what we
Yeah.
base all of our sexual expectations on is like how
Yeah.
teenagers behave. Isn't
Yeah.
that crazy?
And oh, sorry, what were you gonna say?
That's it. Like, that's so crazy that we're like stuck on teenage sexuality as like the benchmark for how sex should be.
I know. And it's so funny thinking about that because I don't want to go back to that hormonal teenager. Like, yes, maybe it felt easier back then, but I'm like, oh my God, I do not want to go back to that time in my life and how I was feeling all of these other, we'll say, side effects from just like going through puberty. And I'm like, okay, we can't, we shouldn't strive for that. But there are ways that we can make this easier because what this is making me think about is another question we got for today was about overcoming the limits around sex when it feels like you're slamming on the brakes, right? And this idea of cues is making me think about this analogy of the gas and the brake pedal, right? So like when we think
Yep.
about arousal, we also tend to, or we usually tend to think about like what gets me in the mood? How do I get in the mood faster, right? What is going to move me toward this? How do I want sex more often? And that is only 50% of the equation, right? The other
Mhm.
50% of the equation is these turn off. So I think about it like your little sex car, right? Like, yeah, you can be laying on the gas pedal, but if you're also standing on the brakes and you have the handbrake engaged and there are cinder blocks in front of all of the wheels, like that car ain't going anywhere. And it sounds like that's what you're talking about with these cues for toward and away, right? Like, is this moving me forward or is it keeping me stuck?
Yeah, exactly. Right. So we're looking at what are our breaks? This is like Emily Nagoski's thing in Come As You Are. So she has her whole little worksheet that you can do and like go buy the book, you can get it. And it's great, it's helpful. And so it's like, okay, like now I know what are the things getting in the way. And sometimes you're not aware of them. I think that we are like vaguely aware of like I'm stressed out, but we might not really like understand the power of that
Yeah.
as a roadblock, and even some of like the more tangential things, right, Aaron? Like the people who are like, I'm doing 75% of the labor in this relationship. And
Yes.
so all of the hormones in my body are producing caregiving hormones, not sexual interest. Oh, let me like throw myself at this like beast of a provider, like
Yeah.
evolutionarily, these are the systems in our bodies. And so we get held back sometimes by the hormones in there. And so it's not just like the mental, emotional overwhelm of having to do all of the tasks or feel like you're parenting your partner, which, bigger system issue that needs to change. But just recognizing that there's hormones now at play that are actively preventing you from wanting to seek sex with that person.
Yes. And I think that's so important. And I'm so glad I was literally talking with a couple this morning about the like parenting type role because mental load is a real thing. And I talk about a lot with my clients. And she was like, well, I don't feel as attracted to him when I'm asking about if he like followed through with whatever the chores were. She's like, it makes me feel like his mother. And I sat there and I'm like, yeah, because does that feel like a sexy role? No, it does not feel good to feel like you are being somebody's mother. Like, of course, that's not a turn on and you're not excited. And on the flip side, it doesn't feel good to feel like you're somebody's child, right? So it has an impact on everybody. That, like, that's not a sexy, fun role to be in for anybody. And I think we miss, like you're saying, like these things that are like cues that move you away and like get in the way because we focus in on, okay, well, how do I do it more often? And how do I
Mhm.
like make it more exciting for me? And that is an important part of the question. But if we don't remove the barriers first, we don't take the pressure off of the brakes, right? Which is one of the
Yeah.
main things I do with my women in Desire to Fire. That's where it feels like we're stuck. I'm doing all of the things. I'm
Hmm.
trying the
Hmm.
lingerie. I've read the books. I've got the conversation cards. I've tried the toys. I read Come As You Are, and I'm still stuck, right? Because it's not a sex drive issue.
Yeah.
It's that all of the barriers are getting in the way and hijacking your sex drive. And I think that's an important piece because this makes women feel like there's something wrong with them when the body is working exactly as it
Mhm.
should be.
Mhm. Yeah, right. So understanding the system is so huge in helping yourself like work on it, right?
Yes,
And like you're saying, like we can't just do put more pressure on the gas. We've got to take some pressure off of the brakes.
I know. Because we're literally spinning the wheel. I love this analogy. We're spinning the wheels. I'm loving it. Well,
Yes.
this is making me think about, I'm curious for you, Erica. It's making me think about like the system as a whole, right? Because another question that we got was about the cycle, right? Which I think is such a common one for women, where this woman was asking about, well, okay, sex feels like a chore,
Mhm.
but that's like stressing me out, right? Because I'm not in the mood. But when we do it, I enjoy it.
Mm.
Why is this happening? I want to do it more often, but it feels like a chore, but then I enjoy it. Like, why am I stuck in this cycle, right? Where it's like the ping pong of I don't want it, but then I enjoy
Mhm.
it. So, can you share some insight on what might be going on for this person?
Hmm. Well, I'm wondering, why she has the expectation that she should just want sex all the time or that it should just like spontaneously arise, right? Like,
Hollywood
where's
movies,
that
throes
coming
of
from?
passion. There it is again.
Yes, but like also teenager hormones, like
Yeah.
it should just happen spontaneously. I've got a boner in math class. So, like,
Yep.
so, okay. Well, I mean, this is your thing. So you tell me what's happening with the whole responsive and spontaneous desire.
Yes, as soon as you said spontaneous, I was like, "Ugh, I love this. This is my, I talk about sex drive all the time, ladies. So I'm gonna jam out on it here for a second. Because I think you're making a really good point, right? Of like this expectation of how it shows up, right?
Hmm.
There are different types of sex drive. One of them is spontaneous desire, where it feels a little bit more like the Hollywood throes of passion, like the teenage hormones, right? Like it just comes on. And that is the only one we talk about. It's the only one we see anywhere. Like it's what we think of as the baseline. And it tends to be more common in men, but there's a whole nother type of sex drive that is a lot more common in women called responsive desire. So basically, the difference in these systems, it's the same system, it's just like they work in opposite directions. So when you think about this, for spontaneous desire, right, the one that tends to be more common in men, their interest. So think about your brain. Your interest in sex kicks on your physical arousal, your body. For women,
Mhm. Mhm.
it's the opposite. Our physical arousal, right? The blood flowing in our body is what leads to interest, right? Our mind being interested in sex. So this is why when people come to me and they say, I'm not really into it at first, of course you're not, because you haven't had that sexy, fun thing happening when your partner just like smacks you on the butt and says, Are you ready to do this? You're like, No, no, I'm not. Of course you're not, because you haven't had enough of that stimulation. But once you are in that space and you're like going through the foreplay, which I'm a huge advocate of foreplay being sex, but to like appeal to the masses, going through that foreplay, that is what kicks on your interest.
Mm.
So I think knowing that will save so many women so much time and effort and stress because it's not broken. It's just working differently than you think it is. And once you learn to hack that system, everything gets easier.
Yeah. So what you're saying is there's a whole spectrum of sexual expression.
I know.
Oh
Who
my
thought that it's
God.
not just one thing that works for everybody, right?
I made a note because I think an important side piece that I've side piece that I've come across, sorry. Um, I've come across a lot in my work with connection and vulnerability is that I think that we are overlooking how a lot of men have been trained to use sex as a way to manage their stress.
Mm,
And so their hypersexuality is really actually a stress response or like a stress management response. And that we're seeing it as they have spontaneous desire. And it's like, they're trying to self-soothe, and that's okay. That's totally okay. But in other ways, it's not okay because that's part of the work that we have to end up doing is looking at, okay, sex doesn't always have to be about connection with your partner. Like we use sex for lots of different things. There's lots of like purpose behind it. But when we're looking at like the expectations or demands on the relationship system, go, okay, if all of this demand is being put on my partner to emotionally soothe me in this way, that's not always the healthiest either. So maybe it's like, okay, guy, and this can happen in same-sex relationships too. This doesn't just have to be in a heterosexual dynamic, but and it goes for women also, I guess. Like some women also use sex to self-soothe and manage stress. But regardless, when there's like this over demand on the partner and it's not reciprocal, right? Like it's feeling like a burden, this demand on me, we look at, well, why is the demand so high? Like
mm.
what are you seeking from this? Is it connection? Okay, or is it also that you're really stressed out and you don't have any other self-soothing tools? So that's, I think, an important part of the system to consider is that we have a stress response that might be preventing us from wanting to get into sex or, a vulnerable dynamic. But we also have stresses that make us want to seek sex as like a self-soothing mechanism because there's all of that hormonal release that then chills me the fuck out.
I am loving this. I'm loving this idea of the difference between connection versus soothing because I think in general,
Mhm.
sex is a hard thing for a lot of people to talk about, let alone when it's like causing pressure and issues in your relationship. And this idea that there are different purposes, I think is so important because like something that's making me think about is that like working with women, something that I hear them say all the time is that like I feel so guilty saying no all the time because I feel like I'm saying no all the time, but I feel like my partner feels rejected and unloved and like now and they start pulling away from affection in general because they're like, well, I'm worried that any touch might lead to sex because like now we can't even cuddle. And so everybody's so touch starved, but there's all this pressure. And I think this idea of the purpose is such
Mhm.
an important piece of the conversation. Like, what is going on? Not just like, what do we want, but what are the needs? Is this because you're stressed and we need to like maybe look at some other outlets? Is it because we're like not connected anymore? That's so interesting.
Oh, yeah. And then, and I think that there's a lot of ways that you can be having sex and not feel connected.
Yes. Yes. I have so many thoughts, but say more before I jump in because I could go on a whole tangent about this. But
No,
yes,
I want
say
you to talk.
more.
You say,
Well,
you say your thoughts.
makes me think about is, and again, I'm thinking about so many conversations that I've had with so many women where they're like, I feel guilty saying no. So like I just say yes and I just like do it to check it off the list so that I can like buy some time and not have to do it again for a while. And do we think that's enjoyable for anybody? It's definitely not for the woman who's like, I don't really want to be here, but like I want my partner to
Mhm.
feel loved. But if we flip that, do we think they can tell? For sure. Right? So like now everybody's just kind of going through the motions, but everybody feels weird about it. And now we're even less connected afterwards.
Mhm.
So now it's getting worse.
And that's a really crummy feeling because some level of vulnerability, which is like self-exposure, not even just like of your body, but like of yourself,
Mm,
did happen, but it was not in a way that felt like complete or soothing or like being held, being seen, you know? And so I think that's the part where I like bring energy into it. Like you're saying, like, what's the intention here? What's your purpose? Like, is your energy moving towards this act? Like, are you in alignment with your desire and your behavior in this moment? Or is your desire like somewhere else? Like you're like, I would rather be doing the dishes, but really, I just need to do this for the sake of my relationship, I think.
exactly. And that is how it ends up feeling like a chore, like another chore on your
Hmm.
never-ending to-do list. And I think an important piece of this too, what you're making me think about when you're talking about like the energy coming into it, is that I think a lot of people think about like sex itself being the problem, sex itself being the focus, right? That like if we're not having enough sex, what does this mean for my relationship? And I argue like if you're not having enough sex, whatever that means, first off, how we quantify that, what is it doing to your connection? Because when we think about the ripple effects at the end of the day, at least for the women that I work with, it's not really the sex, like it is the sex, because that's what we're talking about, but it's not really the sex. It's the lack of that deeper connection. It's not feeling seen and validated and heard and loved and being able to cuddle and show affection just openly and honestly and comfortably, right? It's like now there's this guard and there's this distance. So yes, it's about the sex, but what it's really about is the connection and the relationship.
Yeah. Yes. And, I think for some men too, it's like the sex needs to be there in order for them to feel vulnerable in other ways. Like that is sort of like their domino. Like I need this domino to fall before I can, tell you about my feelings about this. And, like all of that, like masculine training and all of that, gendered
Yeah.
conditioning. So I think just like understand, like let's name what's going on here. And that is so hard for people to do outside of a therapy room, right? Like that's why we have people coming to us because they need that person, that third party to like help them create the narrative of like what is going on here. Naming it is so vulnerable because I have to be honest about how I'm actually feeling and like the
Yes.
fact that we've been having sex and like I can tell you're not into it and that makes me feel like a little bit rapey or like whatever it is, like that is part of this dynamic. So yeah, I think that coming back to like how are we connecting in other ways? How is that contributing here? Like, do I need this piece to feel this piece? And like, how can I be vulnerable and intimate?
Yep.
And it's like, yeah, it's a lot. It's overwhelming.
Yes. Well, and I think what you're saying too is making me think about like why people come to us in the first place, right? That like by the time, and maybe you feel similarly, by the time people finally come to me, they usually have been struggling for years. Like
Yeah.
they've tried all the things. They are like trying to hide the secret. They don't want their partner to know how bad it is. They like are afraid that their relationships are going to implode. And we sit down and we talk about this stuff.
Mhm.
And it's so fascinating to me every time because like the solutions are not as hard as we make them feel. It's because no one ever taught us about this stuff, right? Like how many women know that they have responsive desire and how that works? Very few because it's not a part of the conversation. So once we, like you're saying, create this narrative around like what's going on, how
Mhm.
does the system work? How is it impacting your relationship? It gets so much easier. And this is making me think one other question that we got, because I'm thinking about like making this easier and like learning what's going on because nobody teaches us this. And this is not some inherent knowledge that we have where we just like know how this works and how to navigate this in relationships. Is it
Yeah,
another
we
question
were
from
born
God?
sex gurus, just like hatched out of eggs.
I
We
know.
came to this world with this knowledge.
I know. And I think people think like I should be able to do this on my own because like it seems easy for my partner, but like it's because probably your partner knows more about their sex drive or like has spontaneous sex drive. So like their system is different than yours, right? So there's a
Mhm.
lot. I won't go on that tangent, but another question that we got that I think is so important in this is about orgasm during sex for women. So it was a question asking about like climaxing during sex and how this woman has been able to get there like on her own, like playing with herself and stimulating her clitoris during sex, and why this doesn't happen outside of this. And I thought this was such a good question because, and I have many thoughts, but I'll kick it over to you, Erica, for the start. Like this idea of orgasming from penetration alone. Give me your thoughts.
Okay. Yeah. So this is another one I want to say, why do you have this expectation that that should be like so easy? Okay. Do we want to get into the anatomy?
Let's do it. I love the anatomy. We'll do like a quick, because I know we're coming up on time, but let's do like a quick anatomy because I think it's important because again, a lot of women don't know this stuff. So yeah, let's do like a quick overview.
Okay. Well, pull out your handy dandy little puppet.
So for those of you listening to the replay or to the audio only, I am pulling out, I have Vicky the Vulve, who is a anatomically correct vulva. So if you are listening to this replay, message me if you want, or the audio only, message me and I will pull up the audio because I think this is an important thing to know how it works. So I'm going to just like give a little overview, but I want to keep it simple for those of you who are just listening and can't see it. Okay. So the one thing that I want to draw attention to is this little baby, the clit, right? We think it's like this little button, right? You just push it and it's like go mode,
Cute
right?
as a button.
Cute little button. You just push it and like, oh, magic happens, right? It's an entire internal structure. It has legs, it has curl that go down around the opening of your vagina, and it swells with blood when you get aroused. And this is one of my favorite fun facts when I'm talking to my women. I say, "Do you know?" I said, "Do you know that you get an erection when you're aroused?" And they say, "What? What are you talking about?" But your clitoris is not just that little button. It has legs and glands that go down and around, or legs that go down around your vagina that swell, that contribute to sexual response, to lubrication, to orgasm. And this structure, the clitoris, is one of the main things that women need to orgasm.
Yeah, because there's many times more nerve endings than there are on an entire penis, right?
Yes. I was reading a book one time. It was called Becoming Clitorate, which I loved by Lori Mintz. Loved the title. And I was like, yes, I'm gonna read this. And she was comparing it, like orgasming from like penetration alone. She was comparing that to men having an orgasm from just stimulating their balls. And I love that because how
It's a good
first off,
reframe.
accessible does it make this? How ridiculous it is that we put pressure on ourselves to orgasm in this one specific way when that's not what our body needs. The majority of our nerve touch endings are on our clitoris. They're not in the vagina. So I think this expectation is like you're talking about, Erica, is so important because like your body needs what it needs. We're talking about biology, right?
Mm-hmm, hmm.
So why would we judge how your body functions to orgasm and not meet it where it's at and give it
Yeah,
what's pleasurable and make your life easier?
yeah, yes, right. And so because there is that whole structure, just going back to this question about vaginal penetration, it's like there might be for some people, based on the swelling of the entire like clitoral structure, that putting a penis through the sleeve of the vagina is maybe putting pressure on that whole clitoral system, right? And even like the G spot is just like an overlay of tissue kind of like covering or that's accessing part of the clitoris, right? So am I remembering this accurately?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
You're still nodding, so I'm
I'm
like,
with you.
okay.
I'm like, yes, exactly.
Yeah, but not everybody has that, like based on their anatomy, there might be too much distance between the vagina and the clitoris, or it could be that the way that their tissue is doesn't allow that kind of like friction. So it's not reasonable to expect vaginal orgasm all the time, or even some of the time for some people. And this is where it's so important to learn your own system, through self-discovery, um, or with a trusted partner, but definitely good to know it yourself and have some sense of mastery there. Like, oh, okay, this is what I need. But then here comes the second part, being able to advocate for what you need with your partner.
Yes.
Because I think that we get scared, we feel like we're bossy, or it's not sexy to be like, hey, do this. Like this is what I need. Like, okay, to the person who sent the question, like, have you asked your partner to stimulate you like during sex? Like, is that something that's happened and it's not happening? Or, like, is the disconnect in the expectation you have, or is it in the execution?
Yes. And I think that dialogue is so important. I have a whole training actually in my Desire to Fire method about this conversation because like when we don't have that conversation, when we like subscribe to these sexpectations, right? And there's all this pressure and all this like, here's what happens in porn, so this is what should happen to me, right? What happens is that the pressure on your breaks. So not only is it not fun for you, now you're adding even more pressure to the brakes, and now it's even less fun, and now you're even more stressed out about it. Now you're even more in your head, so it's hard to be present, and that makes it all worse, right? At the end of the day, pleasure is the measure for sex. And there's a specific way to go about this so that you're having productive conversations and it doesn't end up in a fight.
Mhm, mhm,
And one other question that we got, and I would just love to hear your thoughts, Erica, and then we'll wrap up, is the schedules, right? So,
mhm.
like, if one person goes to bed early and the other one goes to bed late, how do you navigate the schedule of finding that middle ground and the balance?
Are we only having sex at bedtime? Um,
So, other times a day?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So we talked about like, okay, so I mean, just in natural rhythms, like we kind of commonly assume that based on male hormonal patterns that they tend to desire sex more upon waking, right?
Mm.
And for women, I think that it's actually because of our like stress response and like feelings of vulnerability that it's easier for us at the end of the day when responsibilities are mostly over, we can
Mm.
kind of relax and let that guard down. And so it's like easier for that to happen then. Um, but anyway, like that's like every couple has to figure out that dance because it can also change depending on which partner you're with, right? Like you might have a
Yeah.
partner where you're like, oh, we had sex all the time, and it was like any time of day, and like maybe that was the dynamics there, and then now you're with this partner, and it's like we have this total mismatch. And then this is where like everything we've talked about in the last 45 minutes comes into play of like, okay, well, do you have responsive desire? Like, do you like what are your cues? Do you have more responsibilities now that are creating more pressure on the brakes than they are on the gas? Like, what's happening in this overarching system? Maybe their anatomy is different. Maybe their penis has a curve. Sorry, we're resorting to heterosexual frameworks here, but like maybe their penis has a curve and it just doesn't stimulate you the way that a previous partner did. Like, who knows? Like, so all of this stuff is like, let's just understand what the systems are, and then take some of the pressure off of like us being flawed and then go back to communicating about it. Okay. Like, what are the dynamics in your relationship that prevent this communication? Because everybody, you have a job change, your schedule's going to change. You might have had a good thing going, and
Mm.
now you have to work the night shift. So, like, okay, talk about it. When are we going to have sex? Sundays at noon while the baby's napping? Okay, that's what we're going to do. But if you feel like you can't have that conversation, that's something to look at. What's so hard about having that conversation?
Yes. And I think that conversation in the first place is such an important piece of this, right? Because, like, in order to have a great sex life, you got to dialogue about it because nobody's a mind reader. And what you're talking about with this, like, balance and the hormonal, like, fluctuations and all that kind of stuff, and like different having sex at different times, like, of the day is making me think about how vacation sex is a thing. Right. And I'm not advocating, well, if you can, for sure, go on vacation all the time and have sex there. But what I'm thinking about is how like there are certain times where we are more likely to want to have sex, and vacation is such a like popular one because there is less stress. You are not living by the clock, right? Like you are doing things that are fun and connective and like in a new place and things are novel, right? All of these things that are like
Mhm.
fodder for a good sex life. So something that I would add on to this too that's making me think about is like think about when you're most likely to be interested.
Mhm.
Is it on a weekend? Is it like on a Saturday morning? Is it on a Monday before the week gets stressful, right? Like it doesn't matter when, because like you're saying, like every relationship and every couple is different. And sometimes we have to make this stuff happen, right? Like schedule it in. There's a specific way to do this so it doesn't add more stress, but like nothing just happens in
Mhm.
relationships, right? Like even that vacation example, you don't just find yourself on vacation, right? You have to plan it and you budget and you book your flights and you look forward to it, right?
Mhm.
Well, the same can be said for sex. Like plan a date on Saturday and then anticipate it and send the text and get excited and think about what you want to do. That I think the more anticipation you can bring in and the more flexibility that you can, I guess, flexibility and structure, right? Of like being flexible with yourself, but then structure and how you implement it can be so helpful because the
Mhm.
balance is real, right? Different sex
Mhm.
drives and relationships is real. And sometimes you have to have those tough conversations to say, okay, how do we find a way that this works for both of us?
Mhm. Mhm. Right. And having it be, like you said, as normal a conversation as, hey, what are we having for dinner? When are we having dinner tonight?
Yes. Normalize the sex talk, people. Normalize
Yeah.
it. Tell us the
Normalize the
more we
sex.
do it, the easier it gets, right? But when it's like this unspoken hush hush thing, it's awkward and it's weird and then it's hard because now we're only talking about when it's a problem. And that's not
Yeah.
good either.
Oh, that's such a good point. Yes.
And definitely normalize that again, the sex expectations, right? The expectations we have about sex is you have sex at night, right before bed,
Hmm.
right? And for
Hmm.
some people that works, and for some people they're like, I am freaking exhausted. And now is not a good time. And fatigue is the number one reason women say no to sex because it suppresses our sex hormones. So get
Oh,
curious.
yes.
No,
Yes.
doesn't matter what works for somebody else. It matters what works for you.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and like I was saying, the relationship as a whole, because it's always going to shift. It's going to shift
Always.
depending on which partner, but also on like what else is going on in your relationship. As soon as you start a new job, you have kids, you lose a significant person in your life, like all of these things are going to have an effect on the structure of your relationship, the
Yes.
dynamics, the context, and so many things have to pivot, right? And
Yes.
so we have to let go of our expectations of things being the same forever,
That's such
you
a good
know?
point.
And I think a lot of that goes back to we expect to our sexuality to function as it did at its peak, which is for a lot of us like when we were teenagers.
Yes. And again, shout out. We don't want to go back to those teen years because they were awkward and weird and we didn't know how to talk about sex then. So, and we probably
We're
weren't
just
having very
doing
good
it.
sex then either, if I'm being honest.
No.
All right, before we wrap up, Erica, is there anything else that is coming up for you that you want to like give a shout out to, that you want to drive home? Anything else that it's important for people to know when they're thinking about this?
No, I think that, well, I think through our conversation today, I think that one of the most important things is thinking about your energy in alignment, you know? And like if your intention and your behavior is in alignment, if you are, moving toward the thing that you want, and if that thing that you want is connection, it will happen.
Yes, I love that. And I will piggyback off that. That is one of the most powerful, like myself in my own life, this idea of thinking about what you want to move toward instead of what you just want to move away from is so powerful because it's actionable.
Yeah.
You can do something with it, right? Like you can actually think about what that looks like, how to make these shifts instead of just like, this sucks and I don't want it to be like this, but I don't know what to do about it, right? Because at the end of the day, I think so many women feel like there's something wrong with them, that their sex
Hmm.
drive isn't showing up the way that it used to, the way that their partners does, the way that it looks on TV, and they think, well, damn, there must be something wrong with me, when that's not true, right? We just need to know how the system works and we need to know how to stimulate it with the
Hmm.
cues and the gas and the brake pedals and knowing the desire, right? And at the end of the day, being flexible that it's going to change. It's not always going to
Yeah.
look the same like you're talking about.
Yeah.
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 All right.
It's gonna
Well,
get there.
Yeah, and it's a process, right? And it is ebbing and flowing. It's also like something I'm thinking about is that like we're recording this in February and it's like cold and it's dreary. And I'm like, even this season, I'm like, I want to hibernate and like don't touch me. Like these things change, they ebb and they flow, right? So be kind to yourselves, be patient, be curious. I think that's one of the biggest things that can be helpful in this. So thank you, Erica, so much for joining us today. This was so fun. I hope everybody listening to this replay afterwards, I hope you're having some aha moments. I hope this is helping you see that there is nothing wrong with you. You are not broken and getting insight into how your body actually works because at the end of the day, we just got to stop fighting ourselves and start working with our bodies. When we do that, everything shifts. So, thank you again for coming. This was so fun. Maybe we'll do another one soon for you all, but we'll see you next time.
Thank
All right.
you.
Bye.